Hello and welcome to Good Taxes training for the 2018 tax season occurring in 2019. So this video is an introductory video. It's intended to teach you the tax formula and the 1040 format. So let's take a look at what our new 1040 looks like. If you have any exposure to taxes in prior years, you will notice that the current year's 1040 has changed. And so this is the new 1040. It's 2 pages, but it's a half a page for each of those pages. And I want to start by looking at the 1040 and then breaking down that 1040 into a formula. So in looking at the 1040, what has happened in prior years, we had 2 full pages of the tax form. But what has happened is that some of those amounts that were on the original tax forms have been pulled out now and put on schedules. So as we go through this training, we are going to address the different schedules. And so this diagram here is right from the training manual from the IRS for the VITA program, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 schedules, and so that's what we're going to be working with as we move into learning about tax law. So the first thing I want to do is I want to begin by looking at the different places on page 2 of our 1040 where we see the schedule or the form divert us to a schedule. And so if we look here, we are on page 2 of the 1040, so it's the second half, and we can see here I've highlighted in yellow the different places where we see the form divert to a schedule. So I would encourage you to look up a 1040 and have a 1040 in front of you while I go through this these first few slides. So yes, we can see that there are several places where the form actually diverts to a schedule. So the first thing we want to understand before we can even understand the tax formula is a couple of basic terms. One basic term that we use all the time as we discuss taxes is AGI. It stands for Adjusted Gross Income, and it is the amount of taxable income after we make some form of adjustment. And so this can be found on line 7. So you'll notice that on our tax form there are a number of different lines, starting with line 1, and then here we can see line 7. So it is on line 7 that we will find adjusted gross income, or AGI. That number becomes very important in a lot of other different calculations. Another basic term is tax liability. That's the amount of tax that must be paid based on the taxpayer's situation. Now I want to, though, make you aware that that is not necessarily the amount owed. It's the amount that must be paid. But depending on what our taxpayer has paid in, it may or may not be the amount that is owed. More than likely not. That's tax liability. Earned income. That's any income that our taxpayer has earned through work. So wages, self-employment, those are things that the taxpayer has been involved in actually earning income, and we call that earned income. There's other types of income that is unearned. So unearned income is income that was received through non-work, something like interest or unemployment or dividends. Those are things that our taxpayer did not work to earn, and so that's called unearned income. We want to understand that income increases AGI. If that term AGI, adjusted gross income, is important, we want to understand how that number fluctuates up and down. And income is going to increase it. Adjustments are going to decrease it. And then deductions are going to decrease it. And then I have here the respective lines on the form and then on the schedule. So you'll see income is addressed on lines 1 through 5 of our tax form, and that's on page 2 of our tax form. And then also on Schedule 1, line 22, we're going to find a total that's going to carry back to our tax form. Adjustments, we're going to find those on our Schedule 1, line 36 is going to be the total. So that's going to be where we find adjustments. So we've already talked about now Schedule 1. And then deductions, if they decrease AGI, we're going to find those on line 8 and 9 of the tax form itself. So let's now look at our tax calculation. So you would not even need to have a form to be able to calculate somebody's taxes. You could do it simply by following this calculation. The only reason we have the forms is so we all do things in a uniform way and we report something to the IRS on their form. So our tax calculation begins with total income. Now if you have a 1040 in front of you, you're going to find that total income can be found on page 2, line 6. So we start by adding all of the income together and we end up with our total income. So that's where we start with our calculation. Then we have deductions. Now that's found again on Schedule 1, line 22. And those are going to reduce our total income. So once we subtract out any deductions, we end up with that number, adjusted gross income, AGI, that we find on line 7. From that number then, we also deduct some other things. We can deduct what we call the standard deduction or itemized deductions. And we take the greater of the two, and that goes on line 8. We will learn about what is the standard deduction and what are itemized deductions throughout this training. Next, we subtract out qualified business income deduction, and that we find on line 9. Now that is a new deduction this year for those taxpayers who have qualified business. So now you'll notice that I had something here that we used to deduct from our AGI and we don't anymore. And that's personal exemptions. So if you have ever heard anybody talk about personal exemptions, that is not a thing anymore. That is gone. That has been eliminated this year. So once we subtract out those things that we have, we end up with taxable income on line 10. We then take what is considered to be our taxable income and we multiply it by our tax rate. We're left then with tax liability. And so that is what we owe in tax. That's not necessarily what we have to pay in, but it's what we owe. So why is it not necessarily what we have to pay in? Well, we can reduce our liability by some sort of credit. So there are a number of different credits, and we're going to learn about those. There are a number of different credits, and that reduces the tax liability that we have. Then we could have a situation where we have other taxes that were not calculated based on our income. It's an other tax. We could have to add that back in. And so what happens then is once we subtract out our credits, add back in other taxes, we end up with total tax. Now, we probably paid throughout the year by way of our deductions from our payroll. So those are considered to be prepayments. There are other forms of prepayments, but all of those things then reduce our total tax. And then what is left over is either more tax that we owe or a refund. So depending on what we come up with as our total tax, we compare that to what we've already paid in, and the difference is either going to be net tax due or a refund. So now that we understand the tax formula, let's move on and talk about the actual tax form. As I stated, our tax form is 2 pages long, and it's a half a page on page 1 and a half a page on page 2. Most of the calculation is going to take place on page 2, but let's start by looking at the top of page 1. So as we look at page 1, we can see that page 1 kind of has our vitals for our taxpayer. It's got our name, our address, our social security number, and then our spouse's name, address, and social security number if it's a married taxpayer. But all of that information is going to go right here at the very top of the 1040. Now just above that, there's a thin line that's going to require that we check one of these filing statuses. And another video is going to cover filing status, but filing status is something that is right here. Every taxpayer has a filing status. Next, our old tax form used to have a section called exemptions. Now that has gone away, or certain pieces of that have gone away, and now we have a section that's just going to cover dependents. And so it's expanded and it's stretched out and it's covering dependents. And so we need to learn and understand what is a dependent. And then we head to the calculations on page 2, which I said begins with income. So we find income on lines 1 through 6 of page 2. And then on line 7, we find adjustments to that income. And so that's a calculation that we've done over on a different schedule that we bring back to the page 2 of the 1040. And then on lines 11 through 12, we have taxes and credits. Line 14, we've got other taxes. Remember, I told you that we could have other taxes. Lines 16 through 17 is our payments. So that's the entire tax calculation now just transitioned over to a form. So that's what we're going to learn as we go through and talk about the different areas of tax law. We're going to work through these different concepts I've just given you an overview for. So that's the first video. Thank you for watching and have a great day.